All right, it's Monday. The week just got started and we already got new Diddy news. So his lawyers filed some documents in court, basically making some very serious allegations against the prosecution, claiming constitutional rights violations and demanding a hearing to address these issues. So let's go ahead and break down what Diddy's lawyers are making arguments about and what the government's response is. And we can talk a little bit about how this thing is likely to play out. So Diddy's lawyers have accused the government of engaging in some pretty shady misconduct. And they said that the U.S. Attorney's Office is in possession of attorney-client privileged material. And that's a big deal. You know, when as a defense attorney, when I'm seeing headlines talking about accusations of the government having attorney-client privileged material, you know, all kinds of alarms and bells are going off because at the end of the day, you know, an attorney-client privilege communication, whether that's an email, whether that's a recording of a phone call, a letter, notes, you know, those are not to be tampered with. You know, those are very protected communication. So anything suggesting that there's tampering by the government in these matters just is pretty alarming. And so they say that the government has conducted a search and seizure, and there's been a violation of the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and the Sixth Amendment. So they're throwing out all the violations here. And if you weren't aware, the Fourth Amendment basically protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures. It generally requires law enforcement to have a warrant when they conduct a search. As far as the Fifth Amendment, it has to do with due process. And the Sixth Amendment has to do with the right to counsel. Diddy's lawyers are basically making accusations that all of these constitutional rights have been compromised by the government's actions. They're saying that the government conducted a targeted raid of Diddy's cell, and this is basically outrageous government conduct. And if this were proven to be true, right, if they've specifically targeted Diddy's cell, then, you know, there might be some problems with that. But, you know, when you see these sweeping, harsh allegations. And I'm not going to say that the government can do no wrong, but, you know, we also can't just jump to conclusions, right? Because these are accusations that are being made. And in the same way, you know, when the prosecution makes certain accusations, we have to look at both sides. So we're definitely going to look at the government's position on this as well. Because the government has these alleged attorney-client privilege communications, the defense, they want to have a hearing in order to address these issues. Diddy's lawyers argue that the government is in possession of privileged notes to his defense attorneys regarding defense witnesses and defense strategies. And again, these are not things that the government should have. Listen, there are rules for a reason. I keep seeing on social media, my friends keep posting about the Kansas City Chiefs and how somehow at the end of the game, there's a call that goes their way, whether a holding call doesn't get called or a pass interference call ends up getting called, allowing Kersey to move the ball down the field. And the reason why people are outraged about this is because that compromises the integrity of the game, right? You can't have teams bending the rules, and you certainly can't have the referees who are supposed to be policing the game bending the rules as well. And so, you know, that's a football game. And I'm not saying that that's not important, but here we're talking about constitutional rights. We're talking about somebody's freedom. We're talking about very serious charges. And so to the extent there's any sort of allegations of government misconduct, we definitely have to take them seriously. And so the defense goes on to say that they weren't aware until they saw, you know, because backing up a little bit, we just did the video on the bail request that the defense just made. Well, it wasn't until the government responded to the defense's bail request and made reference to some of these items in terms of these notes, that's when the defense was made aware that these notes were taken from Diddy's cell. Not only that they were given to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Because remember, it's not like it's the U.S. Attorney's Office conducting these sweeps, right? These are other government employees, but yet these items somehow made it over to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And then specifically, so not just the U.S. Attorney's Office in general, it specifically made it to the trial prosecutors, who then used this information in their brief to argue against Diddy's bond and arguing for continued detention. And so the defense has some demands to some very serious questions. They're saying, first, who authorized the search of Mr. Combs' sleeping area, his personal effects, and his paperwork? Second, who determined what paperwork to take? Third, who decided to give this paperwork to the U.S. Attorney's Office? Fourth, who decided to give this paperwork to the trial prosecutors? Fifth, who made the decision not to tell Mr. Combs' counsel that the U.S. Attorney's Office was in possession of his notes, including possibly privileged materials, until after the government put them in a filing in order to keep him incarcerated? Sixth, exactly what material was taken. And so they're saying because the U.S. Attorney and the trial prosecutors are currently in possession of privileged materials, they're requesting a full evidentiary hearing as soon as the court can accommodate. Court rapidly responded and demanded the prosecution to respond in writing to these accusations, and the prosecution did. And basically the government is coming out and saying, listen, all of this is not necessary at all. It's funny, and I love this stuff. When I was in law school, I was a clerk for a judge. I was a judicial intern. My position at the time was to look at these type of moving papers. When you're filing a motion, you're just basically asking the court to do something. And in this situation, we have Diddy's lawyers raising these issues regarding privileged communications and constitutional rights violations and demanding a hearing to be heard on this. And then obviously there's another side from the government. When you're an intern or a staff attorney and you're giving the judge how he or she should rule, what you're doing, you're looking at both sides, you cite the law, and then you offer your opinion and you give it to the judge. So, judges are busy, right? They're busy with other things, and to be as efficient as possible, that judge has staff attorneys and interns who are doing the analysis for him or her. And, ultimately they have to sign off on it, or, they may say, I get where you're coming from, but I disagree with you, or, whatever the position is. But the staff attorney or the intern aids the judge in be able to make their ruling. So they're not, sitting in the back in the chambers, just doing hours and hours and hours of research. That's for the staff attorney and interns to do. And so, doing this, looking at the defense's letter and then reading the government's response reminded me of being an intern back in 07. Yeah, 06 actually. It's been a long time. But anyhow, the government is basically saying, hey, listen, judge, this hearing is not even necessary. And they open up by saying, hey, well, let me remind you, because this whole thing came up as it relates to bail, and 2 judges have already denied bail. It's already been found by clear and convincing evidence. So that's pretty strong that Diddy is a danger to the community, and there's a risk of obstruction if he ends up getting out. It might sound crazy to you, or, just out of the ordinary to you about hearing about a jail sweep, but the reality is they are relatively routine. So it's certainly not outside of the ordinary to hear of some sort of jail sweep. We obviously on the outside have Fourth Amendment rights, but people in jail, they have Fourth Amendment rights too, but you do not have the same reasonable expectation of privacy as you would in your home. The government could not just come in my office, my car, or my house and start searching stuff under safety and security measures, but they can do that in a jail. That's exactly what the government is saying that they did. Hey, Diddy, he's not at home. He's at MDC. And since he's at MDC, he's subject to BOP, Bureau of Prisons procedures, and sweeps are just part of jail life. So the government goes on to address attorney-client communications while in the detention facility. And inmates are typically provided with unmonitored, non-recorded lines in order to talk to their lawyers. Because again, attorney-client privilege. But when it comes to any other type of calls, so if you're calling your family, you're calling your friends, you're calling your boss, or they're calling you whatever, those are not privileged communications, and those are recorded. And it's abundantly clear. You get a message whenever you call somebody, or whenever you get a call. This call is subject to recording, and these calls are monitored. The emails are monitored as well. Basically, based on these communications, which again, they say that Diddy is well aware that his communications are being monitored, they've found out that he's been making 3-way calls, and you're not allowed to do that. They've been saying that he has had access to other people's phone access codes in order to use a phone as if it was somebody else calling and it's really him. You can't do that. He's also been using third-party text messaging providers, using the jail email system in order to send out text messages. You can't do that either. So all of these communication methods are prohibited under the jail rules. And they're saying not only is he violating the rules by using these communication methods in these ways, it goes beyond that. He's using these communication methods to engage in obstruction, telling people to reach out to potential witnesses and trying to influence the jury pool. And again, these are just not permissible. And ultimately, this raid we're talking about, it was not targeted. It was a safety and security sweep. There were multiple housing units that were searched. It wasn't just Diddy's cell. So yeah, if it were just targeted, we're specifically going after his cell, then this would be pretty problematic. But if it is just a general jailhouse sweep or a general sweep of certain units and his unit happens to be on that list, then their position is that's not problematic. And so they're saying no privileged information was actually taken. In the defense's letter, it very much sounds as though, the government had in its possession privileged information. And that's why, those allegations are so alarming. But what they say is that actually no physical information was taken, that Puff had a manila folder that was marked legal. And typically, you're going to have, if you have materials that you share with your lawyer or notes that you write down, letters from your lawyer, you're going to have some sort of folder that typically you want to write it in red or make it in big, bold letters legal so that everybody knows that those are not to be touched. He had a notebook, an address book, and just some other personal belongings that you would have in a cell. What they say is in terms of the investigator that came through, he felt this folder that said legal on it. He felt it for contraband, just making sure that there wasn't anything that isn't supposed to be in the jail in this folder. And once he found that there was nothing in there, he put it on the bed or whatever. So he didn't actually go into it. And again, nothing was actually taken from the cell, but they took pictures of the notebook and the address book. And so they say, well, the pictures that were taken, this was proper. There was nothing illegal or nothing unreasonable about them taking pictures, because part of the subject of these safety and security sweeps were some of the very complaints that Puff had about the conditions in the jail. And this is why, these sweeps were being conducted. And they're also saying, hey, we used what's called a filter team, right? So it wasn't going straight to the prosecutors in the case. They had a filter team who's tasked with going through and looking at stuff and making sure, okay, is this privileged? Is there something inappropriate about this? Is this illegal? Is this fine? They're going through it and then they pass on the information. And so the government is saying, hey, the use of this filter team is what makes this okay. And they cite case law talking about other situations in which a filter team was used to go through information and that was found to be proper. What they're saying beyond that is that what's in these notebooks isn't even privileged in the first place, right? So just because something, and this wasn't information that was taken from the legal folder, but just because you say it has something to do with attorney-client privilege doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually attorney-client privilege, right? Attorney-client privilege information is communications between an attorney and the client that's meant to be confidential and actually was kept confidential. And it's for the purpose of either providing legal advice or obtaining legal advice if you're the client. And so basically they're saying is that this stuff didn't have anything to do with attorney-client privilege information. They were just, random notes about business stuff, about music releases, about family matters, and just other things that had nothing to do with legal advice. And so these are not protected by neither attorney-client privilege or work product doctrine. So this one's a little difficult to give an opinion on because the defense had just wrote a pretty quick letter and got it out there because I think they wanted to not only make their record, but get their evidentiary hearing as soon as possible. So they didn't write a really long and drawn out legal analysis, whereas the government, in saying what they're saying, that, the sweep in of itself was above board. There was no actual attorney-client privilege information taken. I mean, if there was no attorney-client privilege information taken and this sweep was just a routine sweep and Puff happened to be a part of it, then it seems like it might be a bit of a challenge to demonstrate that the government was out of line in its actions. So, there will be oral argument tomorrow if the judge holds the hearing after all. And so then we'll get a ruling. We'll see what ends up happening. And then, I'm not sure if that bail hearing is still going to be on Friday, given this new development, but we'll see what ends up happening. Let me know your thoughts below. How do you see this thing playing out? Do you think that the government was out of line? Did they do something shady? Or is the defense just, kind of throwing out another smoke screen here? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But if you got something out of this video, please show me some love and hit the like button. Make sure you're subscribed, turn on the notifications so you never miss a new video when it drops. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching, and until next time, peace.